everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. Today I'm going to dive into a few books that I would absolutely love an adaptation of. It's been a little while since I've done like a sit down video, or at least it feels like it to me, and I thought this was a good way to kind of do a little bit more booktube content this time around because I have a lot of writing content coming up. So without further ado, let's talk about all the books that I would love to see made into adaptations. Starting off, I am going to start with an adult mystery thriller, and that is The Death of Mrs Westaway by Ruth Ware. Unless I'm mistaken, Ruth Ware has not had any of her books made into adaptations, which is kind of crazy to me, just because I feel like they would all make good adaptations into movies. But I definitely think this book is following a woman. She has debt to these kind of thugs, and she pretty much makes a minimum wage on reading tarot cards to people, and she's in a bad place because the thugs want their money back and they want her to pay up or suffer the consequences. So when she gets a letter that kind of says that she is an heir to this estate of Mrs. Westaway, she immediately knows it's a mistake. Even though they have a similar name, she's like, this isn't meant for me, but I'm in such a pinch right now. Maybe escaping to this place will not only kind of keep me safe for a little bit, but maybe I can swindle these people into giving me some money so that I can pay my debtors off. And there's a bit of a mystery thriller from there, and this is really good. So there's two options that I would absolutely love to see this book made into, either a movie or a mini series. Now, HBO has been absolutely killing it with their mini series. They made Big Little Lies, which was phenomenal. And they also did Sharp Objects, which again, I don't realize that I never finished that mini series, but I watched half of it and it was so true to the book. And it is one of my favorite books by Gillian Flynn that I just feel like if HBO got their hands on Ruth Ware's works, they would make magic. And I think this is such a good book to do the adaptation of. I've read a few of Ruth Ware's books and they are really good, but I think she keeps getting better with each novel she puts out. And so far of the ones I've read, this has been my favorite, and I would love to see an adaptation of it. In a similar vein, this next book I'm going to talk about, I think should 100% be a miniseries, and that be that. And that would be Sadie by Courtney Summers. Sadie ended up being kind of like a sleeper hit for me. I didn't really think I would like it, or I didn't think I would like it as much as I did. And there was so much buzz around it that when I finally listened to the audiobook, I was blown away. So Sadie follows a young teenager whose sister goes missing, and they have both had a pretty rough life. So Sadie just decides to take it upon herself to go find her sister and or the person she thinks is connected to her sister's disappearance. And you're following two timelines in this book. You are following Sadie as she's on her journey, and you're also following a podcast of a man who was kind of following this story because it started making national headlines of these two missing girls. They don't know, what happened to them and where they are, and he's trying to follow and piece together their story. I think, for one, listening to it as an audiobook was like an entire life experience, and I think I loved the book so much because it was so immersive, and I really had a great experience listening to the audiobook because it was not only a full cast, but it was like a full production. They had noises, so like if they talked about someone entering a house, you would hear it, and it was just so well done that I easily think just on the audiobook quality alone that you could just take that and make movements and make it onto the big screen. I personally think a miniseries would work better because each episode could be like a little bit of Sadie's story as well as like ending or starting with the podcast, and I think that would be really cool to see because the podcast isn't like a huge part, but it does take up like in between chapters, and it's done really well. So I think Sadie would be a great mini series. I would definitely want it to be in good hands again. I think possibly Netflix, but I would just be afraid I wouldn't want Sadie to turn into something like 13 Reasons Why did. I don't think 13 Reasons Why personally needed more than one season. I think it should have just been its completion in one season. However, I do like Netflix's adaptations a lot of times, so I do think if they just kept it as a miniseries, it would be phenomenal. Again, HBO, I've been very impressed by their miniseries, and I think they would also do a good job. But I think my top contender for Sadie would be Hulu, because Hulu has made one of my most faithful favorite adaptations of all time of one of my favorite books of all time, and that's Looking for Alaska by John Green. And they stayed true to the formula of not only the book and bringing it to life, but also it was a one-season show. They did it so beautifully, and I think they can easily make Sadie into a wonderful adaptation in the same vein as Looking for Alaska. Next on my list, I have Vampire Academy by Richelle Mead. Now, you may be wondering, Bree, this was already made into an adaptation. And you know what? We're forgetting that adaptation exists. That is not an adaptation. That is a piece of trash and we're throwing it away. But in all honesty, Vampire Academy follows a young woman named Rose who is what we call a Dhamphyr. She is half vampire, half human. And she has been the protector of her best friend Lissa, who is a Moroi, and that is a full-fledged vampire. So these two kind of, at the start of the book, they're running away from their school because Rose thinks she could protect Lissa and Lissa's strange abilities that she has better by herself. But then they're kind of captured and they're brought back to the school. And in the first book, you're really following them as they adjust to being back at school, as well as learning that some sinister things are going on, not only in the school, but outside in the world, where Strigoi, these pretty much demonous vampires, are kind of lurking and growing in numbers and threatening everyone in existence. So there is an adaptation that is a movie, and unfortunately I think the movie was a steaming pile of garbage, as I've said, mostly because the directors were the same directors of Mean Girls, and because Mean Girls was pretty big at that time, I just felt that they tried to take the formula of Mean Girls and throw it into a fantasy element and just missed the mark of what this book is. Now, granted, the first book in this series can be a little bit campy. We are looking at like late 2000 YA in this series. However, the books progressively get bigger, and I think Richelle Mead does a great job at expanding the world and expanding the stakes. And I think this would be a very good show is a TV series, much in the vein of the Vampire Diaries, how the Vampire Diaries just kind of expanded. Because as much as I love the core of this story, I think this world is so much bigger, and I think they easily could like start branching out and making little differences to be a good TV show. Maybe not sticking entirely to what the script of this book is, but they have so much material here, because not only did Richelle Mead make 6 books in this series, but she did a completely new spin-off with other creatures that weren't as explored in this one, such as alchemists and witches. So they have a lot of material very similar to the Vampire Diaries that they can work with, and I think they could just make this so good because it's such an interesting take on vampires that are not your normal blood-sucking dead beings. Also, I realize that because I'm binge watching My Hero Academia currently, I feel like My Hero Academia as an anime is a very similar style plot-wise to this book, because both books have students who are learning to be whatever they're going to be. So in My Hero Academia, it's heroes with abilities. In Vampire Academy, you have students who are half vampires, who are the protectors and the warriors of the society, so they're learning how to be warriors. And you have the Moroi, who are vampires with gifts of all sorts related to elements, and they're learning how to use their elements. So in both stories, you have these children who are kind of in these like stakes of, you know, learning how to become one with their powers, but there's also these sinister plots going on in the background that is threatening the safety of these students and the very existence of their beings. So if My Hero Academia could do it and make an awesome show, even though I think anime is kind of in its own category, but Vampire Academy could do the same thing, and I think it deserves a rightful, better adaptation than it got. Next on my list, I'm going to move over into the adult fantasy literary fiction, and I am going to suggest Cersei by Madeline Miller as a movie adaptation. I just feel like Cersei is a perfect formula for what people love. It's following Greek gods and their misfits, but it's also a better feminist version of like getting a different side of things. Cersei is not a well-known character in Greek mythology as far as like public opinion goes, and it's nice to kind of like, a nice thing about retellings and stuff like that is you can spin them from a different perspective and you gain something new out of them. So Cersei is a perfect candidate to do this because we've seen Cersei briefly in like all of the old like Odysseus movies. So the fact that we can now get her perspective and we have such great technology now to do really cool effects, I think it would be so cool to be a movie. And it is a slower book, so I think the movie can make some of the slow parts go a little bit faster and be more enticing with visual effects and backstory and all of that. The best comparison I think I have to this plot would actually be Wonder Woman with her whole heritage of the Amazonians. I just think, you know, they've kind of started that path with Wonder Woman in a superhero context, so why not do the same for Greek mythology with Cersei? And that's pretty much all I have to say. I just think it would be a wonderful movie. I love the book. It's beautifully written and also be a beautiful movie. The second to last book I have on this list is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. So this is actually going to be my one stray away from TV miniseries movies, because I just think this concept is so unique that it could make a good adaptation in a different way. Sorcery of Thorns follows a young woman who works in a library and has actually been raised by the library and the people involved in the library system for her entire life. She was dropped off as a baby and grew up in a library, quite literally. Every bookworm's dream. But there's also magic in this world, and the libraries hold books that contain magic. So books are kind of their own entities in this book. See what I did there? They are their own entities, and if you mistreat these books, they can end up turning into monsters that are a huge threat to society. So eventually what ends up happening is a library becomes under attack, and it makes all of these book monsters. And Elizabeth has to find help, and she does so by this very well-known, popular, but very moody and distant sorcerer named Nathaniel. And they go on quite an adventure, and it's a one and done book. I absolutely adored it. I love her writing. I can't wait for more books by her. But this book in particular was just not only atmospheric, but also adventurous, and I don't even know how to, I love it. This is one of my favorite books of all time. That's 5 stars, without a doubt. But the way that this story is told, because of like the magic books, and like I'm just so like visual when I'm reading something, that I think this book would make such an awesome anime. Now, I know I already mentioned My Hero Academia in this, so I'm not like comparing this to that by any means. But in general, the way that everything moves and like I'm thinking of like how the books become monsters and stuff like that. Like, sure, it would be cool to have like a live adaptation, but I think an anime would just fit how this book reads so well. There's definitely like a little bit of campiness here and there. There's a little bit of romance, but there's also some real stakes and danger that's involved. And very much like an anime, you kind of expect things to maybe resolve, but you're not really sure. So I think it would just be really cool to see like these like magical beings, like not only the magical libraries, but the sorcerers coming together to work together to fight these book monsters. And all I can picture it is an anime, in an anime style. It's all I can see it. I also think if you are familiar with anime and you watch it, then I think like the best blend I would have of this book would be that if you like Little Witch Academia and Full Metal Alchemist, shove them together and you get something of this book. Not as very similar to both plots, but like the styles, I just feel like if you meshed the darkness of Full Metal Alchemist with the campy, lighthearted funness of Little Witch Academia, you have this book. And I think it would be great. So Netflix, I know you've been doing anime. Why don't you create this into an anime? I think that would be awesome. Okay, thank you. And the last series that I'm going to offer into a TV adaptation would be the Wayward Children series, with the first book being Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. This series literally couldn't have been made more for a TV show, because the book series, all of the books that have been out, there's 6 so far. I believe there's going to be 10 total. All of these books have like a purpose and like a world. However, they don't always connect. They're all novellas and they all stand alone essentially. So you don't have to read one to kind of get the story of another, except for like one case you kind of do. But otherwise, they're all standalones. And because they're so short, they leave so much open to interpretation and to think about like where they can go and what comes next, that I think like you have the bones of a good TV show of all these children who disappear and go into different worlds, because portal fantasies are still really good entertainment. And I'm just thinking of The Magicians was one of my favorite shows and very popular. That just ended. So we have room for a new portal fantasy. And here we go. The biggest thing with this is that you have a core cast of characters with this first book, but there's definitely room to expand and include other characters. And again, because these are so short, they can just go into so much more depth that the book doesn't cover. And I think fans would be actually pretty happy to see these things play out even further, because the books don't always cover what the fans want, because the fans want more of XYZ, and Shannon's like, nah, I'm gonna write about someone you've never even met in book one. Like, we're just going to a whole new point, a whole new character, which is fun. And I like it for the series to see these other worlds, but sometimes I just want so much more out of them. And what better way to do it with a series that can take the skeleton and give it so much more meat and potentially go on for even more seasons than books are available. So I also petition for this to be made into a series, because this one would be so easy to do. Out of all of these books, this would be probably the most faithful adaptation while still giving viewers more than they wanted and keeping them happy. Those are all the books that I would love to be made into some sort of adaptation. I think all of them have the good makeup to be a good adaptation, with the only one possibly being Sorcery of Thorns, because for me, it would only work out as an anime. I would have a hard time seeing it as anything else because of how whimsical that book is. But the rest of them, I think, could easily be made into TV shows, miniseries, or movies. No problem. And I will just be waiting for this to happen. So let me know down below if you agree with any of my choices, if you've read those books that I've mentioned and you would also like to see them made into adaptations. And if not, let me know what is one book you would love to see made into an adaptation, and what kind of adaptation. Movie, TV show, anime, miniseries, something else that I missed. Let me know down below. My name is Bree Buonomo. I post videos on Tuesdays and Fridays, and I live stream writing here on YouTube, as well as gaming every Wednesday on Twitch. If you want to follow me, all my social medias are linked down below, and you can also support me on Ko-fi. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.